of you probably know Rupert already, but I've only recently met him. But he did this most amazing job of going through what I understand to be a very extensive archive and piecing together the life and letters of Monica Sjoo. So it's really such a privilege to have you come and talk to us about the paintings, because we've been living with them for nearly 3 months now, and we've had all sorts of events kicking off from the subjects that Monica brings up, and we've tried to bring those into topical context, and it's been very rewarding. But if anybody would like, hasn't got a handout, find this useful now, because the paintings are all made and things. That's okay, then we'll just carry on.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, great. Thank you very much, and well done for putting on such a great show. I've never met Monica Sjoo. I should first explain, actually, I'm inclined to call Monica Sjoo because that's what most English people do, but actually those of you that speak Scandinavian languages know that it's actually Monica Sjö, so please bear with me. I'm probably gonna continue just to calling her Monica Sjoo, just because that's what I'm familiar with, but apologies to those of you actually in the know. I've been aware of Monica's work for probably about a decade. I'm a doctor by training, but I live in Cornwall, and I've been involved in the art scene in Cornwall for quite a long time. And I run a website called artcornwall.org, which has got lots of interviews and things on it. And it was really through doing an interview with Cheryl Straffen, probably about 10 years ago, that I first really became familiar with Monica's work. Cheryl is the editor of an Earth Mysteries magazine called Main Mavro, and has been for about 30 years, and she helped Monica publish one of her books in the 90s. And equally, Monica also illustrated one of Cheryl's books around about the same time, so they knew each other really well. And through these conversations, I realised that Monica's one of these figures that's been sort of partly forgotten, certainly by sort of mainstream art historians. And I found it quite astounding, really, how innovative and how important she was to the women's art movement in the 70s, and yet she seems to have been forgotten. She put on the first 3 feminist art exhibitions in this country, 71, 72 and 73. She also wrote the first feminist art manifesto in Europe in 1971. So although people know her, perhaps more for her work as a female, her work with female spirituality and the goddess movement, actually she had a really important role in British art in the early 70s as well. So that was one of the things I really wanted to explore. And the other person I ended up meeting during the time I was trying to discover more about Monica is Maggie Parks, who's here today. A little wave to Maggie, and her husband Phil. And they were also really helpful. By extraordinary coincidence, they ended up with all of Monica's archive, including all the paintings in this room. I don't think you actually had it in your house in Cornwall, did you? But Maggie ended up, after Monica died in 2005, Maggie ended up helping with the storage of all Monica's things, because her son Toivo had moved to Portugal and wasn't in a position to look after the paintings or the archive. So the paper, all the paperwork, all the diaries and all the letters and so on ended up in your attic, and the paintings in storage in Cornwall for several years before they actually went over to Portugal. And it's only really, I think, in the last year that they've come back to this country. So all the paintings in this room today have sort of been on quite a long journey around Europe, but haven't been back in the UK. Haven't been in the UK for more than a decade, or for about a decade. So that's the background, really. So what I was thinking of doing today was talking about Monica's life, and going through sort of chronologically all the amazing things that she did during her life, and try to relate that back to the paintings in the room that we see around us. So I'll crack on with that. Monica had she was amazingly busy and active as a writer and as an artist. So I'm not really going to be able to do justice to her life, but I'll try and give you a sort of potted history. So she was born in 1938 in Sweden. Both her parents were artists, but they divorced when she was about 3, and so she was brought up by her mother, who remarried and they moved to Stockholm. Monica wasn't terribly happy as a teenager. She didn't get on with her stepfather. She talks about how there were rows in the family, and she ended up leaving home quite young. And I think basically touring Europe, and I think she toured Europe for about a year. She was traveling around, sort of picking up work here and there, doing sort of grape picking. She also worked as a model in an art schools. I think she ended up in Paris, modelling in one of the art schools in Paris. She ended up meeting her first husband in Paris in I think 56, yeah. And they got married shortly afterwards, and she had her first child, Sean, in 1958. They ended up settling in Bristol. Stephen her first husband became a silversmith, and Monica started her career as an artist. She got a few little shows in Bristol. She didn't really go to art school properly, but if you shouldn't go to a conventional art school. She went to the Bristol Old Vic Theatre School, where she obviously learned about stage design. And while she was there, she was studying Oedipus Rex, the Greek play, and she discovered the Theban Sphinx. And this was an image and an idea and a goddess that stayed with her throughout her life. It was one of her first encounters with an ancient goddess. So in 1965, her mother dies. She goes back to Sweden for a couple of years, and she becomes very involved with the anarchist movement in Sweden. And with the anti-war protests. I think a lot of people in the 60s were radicalised by the Vietnam War, and she was very much involved with all the protests that were happening against the Vietnam War. And there were lots of other sort of activist activity at that time, including some obviously feminist activity. She became very friendly with an older Swedish artist called Siri Dirkhardt, who was at least a generation older than her, but she was already kind of very tuned into sort of feminist thinking, and so I think Monica learnt quite a lot from this particular lady. And then she comes back to the UK. She travels to the US for a while. She spends some time in the US meeting anarchist groups and some of the most sort of radical groups in New York. She wasn't afraid to just go straight in there. So she didn't meet Valerie Solanas, for example, but she did meet the members of Black Mask, who were the people who were friends of Valerie Solanas, the woman that shot Andy Warhol. So she was sort of connected with that group of activists. In 1968, so either side of going to the States, she starts painting God Giving Birth, which is probably her most famous painting still. But the other thing to say is I can start talking about the paintings now, and I've got my special pointer. Yeah, this one at the back here is the oldest painting in the show. It's a really good example of her sort of painting of the time. It's called After Oppression Revolution, and it's very typical Monica painting of the time. It's got those dark colours. It's got the women sort of look strong. They look kind of angry, I would say. She was certainly at this stage in her life. She was not into pretty painting. She wanted to make sort of bold, strong statements. So then she comes back to the UK. In 1969, she's involved with setting up the Bristol Women's Group, which is one of the first feminist groups in the country. And 69 is where she also paints this one there in that corner, which is, you can see the similarities with the painting on the opposite wall, women seeking freedom from oppression. 1970 is a really important year in the history of the women's movement. It's obviously when the first Women's Liberation Conference happens in Ruskin College in Oxford. And I think the importance of that particular conference is that obviously it gave Monica a chance to meet other feminist artists, because she was up to this point, she'd been quite isolated, but she was able to connect with other artists that were trying to do similar things. But the other thing that happens to Monica in 1970 is she takes a whole lot of her kind of quite more political paintings down to Cornwall to show in a festival in the Guildhall in St Ives. No sooner as she put them up, it's a room a bit like this one actually, it's quite a large room. And no sooner as she put them up, she's told to take them down again, because the councillors town councillors, are not saying that they're blasphemous, and then it's not acceptable to have paintings like this showing in Cornwall, which is, Monica's rightly kind of outraged and really angry about it. But one of the things that, as a consequence of that, she sends out to communicate. She sort of puts out notices saying, us feminist artists really need to come together and form a movement together. And it's really because of Monica sending out that communique to other women artists that the first feminist art exhibition comes together at the Woodstock Gallery, and that's in 1971. And 1971 is also the year that Monica writes the Manifesto. 72, we've got this work here at the back, Women Have Only Their Chains to Loose. It's again, it's fairly typical of Monica's paintings at the time. I suppose one of the interesting things about it, maybe slightly controversial, is the fact that it's obviously she's depicting women from different cultures and different countries. So she's sort of saying that us women are all the same and we need to stick together, which is obviously slightly problematic, but still, it's you get the idea. So 73, Monica has a big exhibition in. So she's beginning to form these links to other artists, other feminist artists, but she's yet really to make a big sort of breakthrough in terms of getting a message through to the general public. But then in 1973, she has a big exhibition at the Swiss Cottage Library. They had a big exhibition space there, and the exhibition was called Exhibition on Woman Power, and she's successful at getting a lot of coverage. So she gets a double-page spread in Time Out, and a lot of the papers write reviews of it, of the show. And it's partly because it's got a lot of the controversial work that was banned in St Ives is being shown in Swiss Cottage, and including God Giving Birth, of course, which is still the painting that everybody seems to want to talk about. So the works from 73 that we've got here is this one, Men and Housewives, which is this one here. One of the interesting things that happens, 74, she paints this rather lovely blue painting. There's a bit more colour in that painting. The interesting thing there is that it's obviously got two lesbian women in the middle of the image, and I think Monica described herself as being bisexual, but I think in 74 she certainly had a serious lesbian relationship, and probably the first. We think it's probably the first that she had. 75. The important thing that happened in 75 really was the fact that she wrote the first draft of this book, which is the book she's most famous for, The Great Cosmic Mother. It came about because she'd already been, she was being asked to give talks, and she'd been asked to give a talk in Birmingham, and by a chap called Keith Payton, and he helped her get her talk together into a book, some sort of a book form. And initially it was just 30 pages of kind of photocopied A4 or whatever, but it's still basically the basis of the book that was published later. Monica actually ended up in a relationship with Keith, and 75. This painting here is from 75. It's called Women's Work and Craft. It's not explicitly political, is it? But it's got this idea that women from different cultures have the same struggle, are dealing with the same issues. So it's interesting that Monica, the early part of the 70s, Monica's really active in the feminist art movement. She seems to stray a little bit away from that, I think, later in the 70s. I think one of the turning points for her was an occasion in 1978 where she goes with Keith Payton, to Silbury Hill. And Silbury Hill in Wiltshire is part of the Avebury complex. She takes some magic mushrooms and she goes up onto Silbury Hill, and she has this kind of quite profound transformative experience where she experiences the land as being the living goddess. So although up to this point she'd be very interested in goddesses and the idea of the goddess speaking through her, she has this revelation that, of course, the goddess is actually in the land as well. And this is partly inspired by Michael Dane's book, The Silbury Treasure, which came out a year or two previous to that. And the Silbury Treasure has this idea of the Silbury Treasure. If you look down on Silbury Hill, you can see there's various kind of moats and things around it, which actually looks like the shape of a woman squatting, giving birth. And therefore, Silbury Hill itself is like the symbol of a pregnant woman. So this is quite a profound insight for Monica. The other thing that happens around about that time is that she and Keith move to Wales. So there's lots of paintings here relating to basically Monica becomes much more interested in the landscape, in the Celtic landscape, in the sacred landscape. And so you start seeing landscape imagery in her work. So that is really from about 1978, 79 onwards, but here the best examples are probably that one at the back. That's called Bleeding You Mother. It's not that obvious from the painting, but actually you can see the yew tree is this shape, I think, behind the women in the foreground. And it's based on, so she's moved to Wales, she's moved to West Wales, Pembrokeshire, and a few miles from her house, a little cottage where she's living, is Nevern Churchyard. And Nevern is famous for having four or five very old yew trees in the churchyard, and one of them is always bleeding, so it's known as the Bleeding Yew of Nevern. And that's I think what that painting is based on. The other Welsh ones, what else have we got? This is obviously a Welsh-themed work. It's the triple Ceridwen at Pentre Fan. So Pentre Fan is the cromlech, this here, which, and again it's only a few miles from where Monica was living. It's a Neolithic tomb, and there are three goddesses, or three representations of Ceridwen, here, and here. And it's fairly typical of Monica's work at the time. What else have we got? There's quite a few Welsh-themed ones. This one I think is a Welsh one, although I don't quite understand. I'm not sure about the symbolism in this one. This is a Welsh rocking stone and spiralling spirit woman. St Non's Well, Holy Grail. Where's that? There's two St Nons, aren't there? There's that one, which is the later one. One of them is Celtic Mysteries. Sorry, maybe it doesn't matter that much. That's Celtic Mysteries, St Non's Well. So St Non was thought to be the mother of St David, the patron saint of Wales. And whereas St David's got the big church, the big cathedral in St David's, St Non there's a holy well dedicated to her that's a little bit further up the coast. And so I presume that's St Non there and St David there. And this is the holy well here. It's got this distinctive kind of white arch. And you've got the coast of Pembrokeshire there. So it's very much, and that could well be one of the bleeding yews. In fact, I think it probably is. Looking at it now, I can just see there's quite a lot of red coming out of it there. So there's lots of Welsh symbolism in that painting. Where's the other St Non? Yes, there it is. So that's got some of the similar symbolism in this one as well. If you can see definitely that's the bleeding yew, I think. And there's St Non's Well. And this is presumably the Grail and a green man. Yeah. So, yeah. So I'm just thinking, so that, as I say, that at this time Monica was started painting a lot of landscape imagery, and it's not just Welsh landscapes. She was travelling around the UK, visiting sacred sites all over the UK, and actually this is when she wrote Spiral. She wrote Spiral Journey as a collection of essays that she wrote between about 78, when she was on Silbury Hill, to about 84 when she was, I can't remember. But anyway, it was published in it was finished in 84, but never published. That's what that book is. So some of the other sites around the UK. This is called St Brede's Well. St Brede's Well at Imulk, and this is a site on Lewis, I believe. Oh, you'd know, yes. Am I right? Thank goodness. Yeah. Yeah, in the Hebrides. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is a really important painting from that period. This is 1993, and this is one of my favourite paintings by Monica, but partly because I really love the title. It's called Meeting the Ancestors, Avebury. And this is the Silbury Hill that I was talking about. I think this must be the avenue that runs between the big Sarsens at Avebury. And I think there's this sense, aren't there, that the Sarsens at Avebury are somehow inhabited by spirits, and you get this sense, you kind of see these faces emerging from the stones, and then obviously you get these figures emerging from the stones as well. The other one perhaps to mention now is perhaps this one, which is another, this is Cornwall, Ancient Land of the Goddess from 1993. So it's another one based on her, I mean, in a sense, I think all of the paintings here from the 90s and from the 80s and 90s are based on Monica's travels. So she would quite often visit Cornwall. And this is, those who know Cornwall may recognise Trethevi Coit, which is a large coit in North Cornwall that's got a hole in the capstone. And this is the cheese ring, which is quite near to Trethevi Coit. And we think that's Sancreed Well, don't we? Although it could be any number of wells, potentially, but that's a holy well. I think the most important, I should probably try and to talk a little bit about the events of 1985. 85 was a traumatic year for Monica because her youngest son, Leif, was killed in a road traffic accident. He was, I think, about 15, and they were on holiday in the Pyrenees. And I think he was just hit. They were on a mountain road, I think, and he was just hit by a car. And he goes into hospital in France. He's in hospital unconscious for several days. And while he's in there, Monica visits him and places a leaf on his chest. So I'm feeling quite moved, actually, as I'm telling this story. This is an image of Leif in just the day before he was killed, riding a horse. And these are his ashes, which Monica took back to the UK with her and buried at Tally Valley, which was in Wales. It was an area of land that was owned by some friends. The night he died, she saw this image of a dove, and 1986, yeah. So the other thing that happens is that her other son develops lymphoma and also dies a couple of years later. And so there's two other paintings here that are relating to the death of her sons. This is Rebirth from the Mother Pot, which is this little image here is a little portrait of Leif. I think possibly this was painted before Sean died, because I'm not sure that Sean necessarily is in this image. So So I think that was just before Sean died. But this one is a tribute to both her sons, and it's called My Sons in the Spirit World. That's Sean, that's Leif. This is Monica as she appeared at Leif's funeral. She ended up, I don't think it was planned necessarily, but she ended up wearing this headdress that happened to sort of be lying around. It's the wings of an owl, I believe, that was, and so she wore this during the funeral, which was held outside. And it was obviously, she was by this time she was a very much committed neo-pagan, so she developed all sorts of quite, it wasn't going to be a conventional funeral. She devised her own funeral using various liturgy and music that she'd chosen herself. But she also wore this outfit. So yeah, that's what that painting depicts. 87. The other thing that happens around about this time is that this most important work by Monica gets published in the States, and that's what it ends up looking like. It went through several different versions actually, and it got edited quite a lot by Barbara Moore, who was an American woman who worked with Women's Spirit magazine. Anyway, that's how it ended up looking like, and that's if you buy it now, it looks like that. So it was kind of expanded from the original photocopied leaflets that Monica wrote. And the thing there is that, of course, it meant she became a bit of a celebrity, to be honest, because it sold really well, and she got lots and lots of correspondence from the States, and she found lots of new fans and new people interested in her work, which was great for her. And of course, one of the best known perhaps is Alice Walker, the novelist who wrote The Colour Purple, who became a big supporter of Monica and a great advocate for her in the States. And various other people like Susanna Budapest, who organises the Goddess conferences and was one of the leading sort of Wiccans in the States. And people like Stahlhawk, and a lot of these people that are quite famous in sort of pagan circles in the States started corresponding with Monica and started inviting her over to the States. So really going into the 90s, one of the main things that happens is that Monica just travels a lot. She ends up going over to the States at least once a year to attend for talks, or because she's having exhibitions put on. The other thing that happens, she's travelling all over the place. She actually goes back to Sweden, spends quite a lot of time in Sweden in 1994. And that shows in her work. So we've got a few works here that are from the mid-90s that were probably inspired by that visit. She spent several months in Sweden, particularly exploring up towards the Arctic Circle. And so, what have we got? Nordic Symphony. That one would have been, I think that's about 1995. Anyway, the iconography is all relating to Sweden, and particularly the northern part of Sweden, I think. I know this is called Alice Stenar, which is I think it's an Iron Age monument in the shape of a boat that's just near Gothenburg. I know that was inspired by her travels. I think that one's called, I've written it down somewhere, Nordic Sun Goddess petroglyphs. Yeah, these are petroglyphs, just figures drawn into stones. There's quite a lot of petroglyphs across the whole of Sweden, actually. So she became particularly interested in those. And I think I'm right in saying that this painting here, which is Forest People, again that's from the late 90s, I think. I think that's inspired by her trips up to the very north of Sweden, because I think there's an Arctic forest called the taiga, which is a really important ecological kind of resource, a bit like the rainforest. It's a huge expanse of trees, so she's very interested in that. But also obviously concerned that they were being chopped down. So you see the tree stumps here with the blood coming out of them. Which actually relates to this painting, which is again from the mid-90s. Monica was very active, very busy person. She was involved in she was giving talks, she was having exhibitions, she was involved in lots of activist groups, and she was going on marches. And one of the marches she went on was the or one of the demonstrations, was she joined the road protesters at Newbury Down. She would have counted many of them amongst her friends because she was very much connected with CND groups and lots of activist groups at the time. And this is the painting that came out of her visit to her stay at Newbury where the bypass was being built. And it's got quite a long title, this one, but it's, where is it? Mother Earth in pain, her trees cut down, her seas polluted. Very blunt, direct kind of message. And it sort of speaks for itself, I think, that work. So yeah, she's travelling around. One of the places she travels to is, she goes down to southern Spain. Some of her friends from Wales have moved down to Andalusia. She goes and stays with them in a teepee, and she becomes very interested in Tanit, the goddess Tanit. And I know there's a few paintings relating to Tanit here. I know I'm going to probably get them a little bit confused. Andalusian goddess in her aspects is, I think, that one. Yeah, that one, because that's an image of Tanit or Tanith, which is she's the ancient sort of Phoenician goddess. So that's one of them. That looks like one as well, because that's the symbol of Tanith there. And there's one other one. Let's think, where is it? Oh well. I think there is. Oh no, it is just the two. So the other place that she visits a lot during the 90s, which I think is particularly interesting, is Malta and Gozo. I don't know I really want to go to Malta. I haven't been yet. It's one of the. It's kind of very interesting because there are lots and lots of ancient sites on Malta which appear to have been dedicated to the goddess. There's the idea, just like Crete had a peace-loving, goddess-worshipping society, so too did they have a similar society on Malta. There's no all the temples on Malta have been, the only figurines and statues that have been found in Malta are images of the goddess. So it's believed that these societies were goddess worshipping societies, which is of course of particular interest to Monica, who Malta and Gozo, yeah. I mean, yeah. So there are some nice Malta. Oh, that's the other Tanit painting, isn't it? There's the symbol of Tanit. So that's another Tanith painting. The Malta paintings are that. Yes, behind Maggie. There we go. There's one. That I know that is. I think that's called Haukka or something. Is anybody familiar with Malta and the sites in Malta? Haukka, is it? Yeah. Do you recognise any of the others? Any other? Do you know which that's going to be one of the other? Maybe that's Tarshan, is it? One of the. That'll be one of the other temples, I think, that there. And these will be goddesses and figurines that have been found in and around Malta. Yeah, so that's one of the Malta ones. That's a Malta painting from the 90s. Yeah, one of the interesting things about the Maltese temples is that they include underground temples. These are temples that were built at the same time as Stonehenge. They're sort of Neolithic temples, 3,000 years old or so, and that's called there's several underground temples, and the most famous one is the Hypogeum that's depicted in this painting there. Yeah, and these are some of the other temples on Malta. So I've nearly finished the talk. I want to just highlight this one really because it's a particularly nice painting. Relatively late. It was painted in 1999. One of the nice things about it feels like Monica's going full circle because here's the Theban Sphinx that's initially inspired her really to become interested in ancient cultures and the goddess. And these are other famous goddesses. That's Artemis, an image of Artemis that some of you will be familiar with. Yeah, it's rather good one. So Monica carries on painting into the 2000s. She first had a lump removed, I think, in 1998, but then the cancer came back. 2003, she was diagnosed with secondary cancer, and she ended up dying in 2005. So she was, although she was confined to a wheelchair for more than a year, and still quite active. There was a big exhibition that Maggie was involved with that was put on in 2004 in Bath, and then Monica died in August 2005. And she was, it was an amazing life, I think, and very full and amazingly productive. And I've only really just scratched the surface of it today. But yeah, I don't know if anybody's got any comments or questions or.
Yes, I wanted to ask her relationship with Mexican, because this is the Grail got a Rupert and some goddess deities, which is Plus Hotel, and also in that one there, which is a Dakini, a Buddhist Dakini. So, do you have any information about that?
Not especially. I mean, I know she visited, when in the 90s when she was going to the States, she travelled around in America quite a lot, and she definitely travelled down into Mexico on at least one occasion. So my guess is that this is a painting that's a response to that, to her travels in Mexico. Yeah, right, yeah. And the Dakini, I don't know what to say about that painting really. I don't know if anybody else has got any comments on it particularly. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because it sort of looks like a British landscape behind her. For example, we've got a Cretan labyrinth there, which is a bit like the labyrinths down at Rocky Valley in Cornwall. But
the female Buddha, like the standing Dakini, is quite particular, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and I don't know much about that painting, if I'm honest.
Robert, I'd like to. What amazes me is that there's so many paintings that she didn't sell. And how I know her work at the time was that she had a lot of paint posters. That seems to be how she made her money, and they were all monocoloured. So I just wonder how much did she actually sell during her life in her practice, because where is the Rebirth? Is that in Sweden?
Oh, well, I didn't explain that, did I? I should have sort of explained a bit more about that. What I didn't say was that in the late 70s, Monica organised for all her paintings to travel around the country. And they went to about 11 different venues in the UK, and then they went over to Germany, travelled through Sweden. So this is in the period between about 1979 and 1983. They ended up in Sweden in storage, and they've never come back. So a lot of those, one of the things about the work in this room is that that's one of the reasons why the work in this room is mainly from the 80s and 90s, because a lot of that work from the 70s is in storage with the Anna Nordlander Foundation, they're called, up in northern Sweden. But I know for a fact that, I think I'm right anyway, in saying that Monica's got a solo show at the Museum of Modern Art in Stockholm next year, possibly, quite soon. Yeah. And I think a lot of that work is going to come down and be shown as part of that, and some of this work is probably going over there, isn't it?
Yeah, and Minna's curating a show of posters at the Feminist Library, which is open until the 10th. Yeah. So there's a concurrent posters.
But you're right. I mean, a lot of these paintings didn't sell, and one of the reasons being they're just so big. I mean, most people can't. I mean, I guess she was painting them, thinking of them going into large museums, or I guess the scale is a reflection of her ambition for them. But the reality is, most people haven't got houses big enough to actually house them. But
I must say, I think actually in her lifetime she didn't really sell her paintings. But there are many, many more paintings, because actually she would give them away sometimes, and sometimes she would exchange them. But really,
Well, they did, yeah. They went on tour. I mean, she toured.
But a lot of these
Yeah.
I mean, I think, so things like, remember the African triptych up there, where she would do the goddess conference at Glastonbury, and she put paintings up in and around Glastonbury, and actually there are quite a lot of Monica's paintings.
Still in Glastonbury. Yeah.
But, you know, I think, you know, Alice Walker owns art pictures, so I think they are, you know, this actually is only a bit of her work, and they're quite stunning, aren't they? I think it's just amazing to see them. And say thank you to Beaconsfield.
One of the things is the one that was sold or didn't or the lovers that never bought wine and then at the time. Right. Someone bought wine and then at the time. Right. Whereas I think tonight,
It's also quite extraordinary that when she was working in Bristol, she didn't have a studio, she had a friend's house that she managed to have a room in that house where she painted. And to do work of this size in a tiny room, a relatively small room, it's incredible. And at that time she didn't have much money, so she was, I think the idea of the prints was a thing she could take when she did talks.
Yeah.
She could sell the prints because she couldn't take these around with her at that time.
And you see a little of her spiritual charge in every one of the paintings, because as I read, that she became kind of in the spiritual development, maybe in Cornwall, or connecting also with her Nordic ancient traditions, and developed a lot of kind of shamanic aspect of her work, because I was doing some embroidery as I'm an artist and a healer. I did some embroidery, and then I realized that some of my symbols were in her paintings, and I was quite surprised and quite really a strong connection, because I didn't know about her work, and I felt really super connected with her. So thank you very much for coming.
I think in art, in terms of art history, it's interesting that, I mean, when you look at the feminist artists from the 70s that are remembered now, or get represented in the Tate collection, for example, a lot of them are conceptual artists, because conceptual art was the fashionable thing in the 70s, and so the fact that Monica was painting was potentially a bit of a problem for her in terms of getting sort of recognition by the art establishment. But of course, people's views change with time, and you know, there's every reason to believe that she could be part of a revisionist type history, hopefully anyway.
But she also believed that she was actually channeling, those energies. I mean, she really, and she was part, in the 70s and 80s of that mass women's spirit movement. And if you look at, I'm revisiting Maria Gimbutas's work, and Maria Gimbutas was an anthropologist who was ridiculed because she went around the world. And a lot of these images, she sort of unearthed and uncovered the names, goddess, and matrifocal cultures. So there was a massive influence from lots of different places. And I think always what's interesting in Monica's work is she doesn't seem to just do a Celtic painting or or a North African painting or whatever. They're really mixed. All the symbols are very mixed. But I think
It's very interesting in the Guadalupe, because she mentions there the dark side of the Virgin that actually has so much embedded into the Mexican culture, and how they managed to convert the indigenous tribes through Catholicism because of that apparition. But in this painting, she puts the Virgin Mary, the Guadalupe, but her dark side, which is quite interesting. And then she painted the two versions of Tlazolteo, which in Nahuatl means the goddess that eats filth, like dirt. So it's a kind of a purification thing. The one that gives birth, and the other one that actually eats filth, and it's a kind of a healer in a way. So it's I think it was remarkable.
also Welsh tradition of the sin eater.
Yes, yes, yes. So this has a kind of a connection with that Welsh tradition that she was living.
One thing we didn't talk about is obviously Monica's connections to Greenham Common and to that particular moment in our British history, I suppose. And I know there's people in the room here who were at Greenham Common themselves and were involved in a lot of those marches from the early 80s. It's interesting, Monica was had already become something of a figurehead, I think, at that by the 80s, hadn't she? She was already sort of admired by women that were, yeah.
Rather than her work, if you weren't in a conference, then she wasn't bringing up posters to readings. And she did lead and bring, not everyone is interested in the more spiritual, earth-based actions, but that's the work of Monica.
Yeah.
Very much.
Yeah.
And really, actually, there's a lot. She would put her body in the light. I remember standing in Bristol, doing eco stuff, right up till a year or two before she died. She was standing in Bristol holding up placards. So she was literally always, and I think she really, the personal is political in feminism, but for Monica, the spiritual was political and activism was all part of it. And I think she saw her art as part of her activism. I think uncovering women's power. I just think to the British Museum today, to the
Divine Feminine.
power and exhibition. And actually, it's really interesting because there's quite a lot of images that are in there.
Yeah, plus on there is there in the British Museum.
And so I think her paintings were about bringing ancient women's power back into the everyday here.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And she was a genius.
She was brilliant as well.
And she was very, it strikes me she was very driven, which, yeah.
And an amazing network. And
Yeah.
she managed to connect women all over the world, people
Yeah.
all over the world.
Yeah.
And, in the archive that you've seen, just this, these letters, these constant letters. She must have spent her days just writing cards and letters to people and getting them back just listening, before we had these things. I don't think she ever had these. No, she hasn't. But
Yeah, I mean, one example there, which I think is maybe of interest to people here, was, I don't know if you know Anne Pettit, but she was one of the people that organised the march in '81 that ended up at Greenham Common, and therefore she set, in a sense, she was involved with at the beginnings of the Greenham Common camp. She was one of Monica's friends in Bristol in the late '60s. They were, and she would have written some bits and pieces for Monica, but also I know that they made posters with the Sphinx on it that they put up all over Bristol and all over particularly in the Union at Bristol Uni, which is I think where Anne was studying at the time, where she was a student. And that's in the late '60s. And so she has these kind of these connections going right back into the So she had these connections going, back into the '60s. Was when she was really, quite active. She was more active as an activist than as a painter potentially at that time.
And I think that's one of the things about her posters, that are very accessible, it's very democratising way of, especially like some of us communicate better visually than verbally or in the written word, and so she covered both bases.
Should we finish there? Thank you very much for coming.